All right. So, good morning, everyone. I apologize. I know you're expecting someone taller, thinner, and better looking, but he's not in town today. So
You can't be talking about Logan.
So, Adrian is teaching our high school class this morning, and so Logan asked if I would sub for him, so I'm going to do that. When he gets back next week, we'll continue our study of biblical history as it relates to world history or secular history. The series that he started last summer, he's going to pick that up and continue that again this summer. So in an effort to kind of think historically, we're going to talk today about King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So if you'll open your Bibles up to Daniel chapter 2, I think this is a story that most people are familiar with, and we're going to look at it fairly quickly today since it's about a 45 minute time period. But it's an interesting event as far as the fact that it foreshadows much of world history. And so since that's what we're studying with Logan, I thought that would be, actually Logan and I talked about it, and he said, hey, why don't you do this? So it was Logan's idea. Don't want to take credit for it. But so we're going to talk about that today. So if you'll turn to Daniel chapter 2, and I apologize, we've spent a week moving from a house to house, and one of the two is dirty. I'm not sure which one because I've got dust and I am congested from it. So anyway, we'll start in verse 24 when we start reading. But before we start reading, let's recap verses 1 through 23 very quickly. So at the beginning of Daniel chapter 2, we see that King Nebuchadnezzar has had a dream. He's had a vision, had a dream, and you know, in our Old Testament especially, it's not unusual for people to have dreams, to have visions. And then those dreams and visions have meanings, and they're interpreted, and kings ask people to interpret these dreams for them, and then they're given the interpretation, and you know, it sets things in motion. But there's something a little different about this story in the fact that King Nebuchadnezzar asked his wise men to interpret the dream. That's not unusual. But what is unusual about King Nebuchadnezzar's request? Yeah, he doesn't say, hey, you know, here's my dream. Somebody, one of my wise men in my country here, I need you to tell me what this dream means. He says, I need you to tell me what this dream means. And not only do I need you to tell me what it means, you have to tell me what it was. So he's really put him in a hard place because, you know, it's pretty easy to come up. I mean, Tina and I talk about a dream we had last night, and you know, if I'm going to psychoanalyze myself, here's what I think it means. Well, I don't know what it really means. It may not have any meaning at all. Maybe, you know, I ate some bad food. But the point is, I can come up with some philosophy of what that dream meant. And given enough time, you know, I can make it sound kind of flowery and pretty and good, and, you know. And King Nebuchadnezzar knows that. As a matter of fact, in verse 8, the king answers his wise men. He says, I know for certain that you would gain time because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there's only one decree for you. Because they are asking him for time. Give us some time. Let us know. You know, we got to, first of all, they say, hey, you got to tell us the dream. How do you expect us to interpret it without that? So the next part of it, though, makes it kind of scary for him because he tells them what? If you cannot interpret my dream, then you're useless, and what's going to happen? Yeah. Oh. So I've heard a couple of things. Let's see if Mr. Bobby can get a microphone to somebody. What happens?
Probably not.
Probably not. What happens if his wise men cannot give King Nebuchadnezzar an interpretation, tell him what his dream was and give him an interpretation? What's going to happen? Okay, he's going to kill him. And what specifically, if you look at verse 5 real quick, what does it say? He doesn't just say, I'm going to kill you. He's pretty descriptive. What's he going to do? Yeah, it says he's going to cut them to pieces and make their houses an ash heap. So he's really serious about this. It's a big deal. And so it says that he starts sending the men out to kill his wise men because he's not getting an answer. And then when the executioner comes to Daniel's door, Daniel says, wait a minute, what's the hurry here? Hang on a second. Tell the king I'll give him an interpretation, but he needs to give me just a minute. He says, give me a second. I'll give him Daniel says, tell the king I will do this. Give me some time. I've got to confer with God. And so what happens then, of course? He does. That's right. God gives him an interpretation. God tells him what the dream, in a vision that night, God tells him what the dream was, and he gives him the interpretation of the dream. And then we see in verses 20 through 23 that Daniel spends his time thanking God. He does exactly what he should do. God gives him the interpretation. Daniel understands that this is going to save his life, and so he praises God. Spends some verses giving God praise for what he's done. So let's pick up in verse 24, and we're going to read verses 24 through 30. All right, Daniel chapter 2, verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly, I thought that was interesting. He quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers, cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So, in these verses, what's the first thing Daniel does when he goes before the king? Okay, he gives credit where credit's due, doesn't he? He says, God gave me this interpretation. As a matter of fact, he says, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. So he wants to make sure that King Nebuchadnezzar understands, this isn't me, this is God. And then what does he tell him? Not only did God tell me the interpretation, but he gave you the dream. He not only gave me the interpretation, God's the reason you had that dream. He says he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. What's important about that statement? Why did Daniel think it was important to tell the king, God gave you this? Did King Nebuchadnezzar worship the God of Israel? No. So why is it important that Daniel tell the king, God in heaven, my God, gave you that dream? God's in control.
What I was going to say is that she just said it, took the words out of my mouth practically, but at its time he told him it was our God that did this to him. But at the same time, when he says that, he's already tried his gods, and he sees the comparison between the real God and the false gods.
All right, so there's a couple of things there. Number one is that Daniel wants King Nebuchadnezzar to understand God is in control. God is greater than you are. Because King Nebuchadnezzar felt like he was it. You know, he wanted to make sure, Daniel wanted to make sure King Nebuchadnezzar knew, my God is greater than you are. He's the one that gave you this dream. And then Jim pointed out that he'd already tried his wise men. He'd already tried his priests, his prophets, his people, their gods could not answer the question. And so he's making a point here that this is the God of Israel. He is the God of heaven. He is my God, and he's greater than you are, and he gave you this dream. And then Daniel gives two reasons. You know, how many of us have had dreams, and then you go around thinking, what did that mean? Have any of you ever had that happen? Yeah, you know, you wake up and you're like, that was weird. And, you know, if you've got somebody to share it with, Tina hears mine all the time. I'll wake up in the morning, we're getting ready, I'm going, you know what I was dreaming last night? I told her this morning I was mad at her when I woke up because she did something. She had offended me in a dream, and I was upset about it. I was like, okay, so wonder what that means. But, you know, we have these dreams, and we don't have anybody interpret our dreams, and so we just go around wondering, you know, what did that mean? Have you ever had a recurring dream? One where you have it multiple times, and then it really starts to get on your mind, like, oh, well, you know, why am I having this dream? And I think it's interesting because, you know, we don't ever really get interpretations of our dreams. But Daniel gives the king two reasons, and these are in verse 30. He gives him two reasons that God is answering him and giving him an interpretation. What's reason number one?
So that you may know the interpretation of it.
Oh, well, that's one of the two reasons. He says, so that you may know the thoughts of your heart, so that you'll have an interpretation. But what's the reason he gives before that? You know, I'm an old school teacher. We got wait time here. Read your context. So, for our sakes, yeah, so that I can tell you, King Nebuchadnezzar is going to have what happened to Daniel, and if you really read into it, Daniel and his buddies, if you go back into chapter 1, you got Daniel, I believe in chapter 1, their names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and those names become the ones that we're all familiar with, which are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so Daniel is telling him, God gave us this interpretation so that you don't kill us and so that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So there's a couple of reasons that Daniel gives. Daniel continually answers the king, but answers the king in a way that lets the king know this is not all about you. This is about God. And he keeps telling him that, points it out over and over and over. All right, so let's read verses 31 through 35. Let's keep going. Verse 31, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So Daniel gives him what? Right there. What did he tell him? The dream. Daniel gives him in great detail his dream. So there's, You know, if I tell you a dream I had and you go, oh, I think that means, that's kind of fun and kind of cool. But if you walk up to me and go, Carlon, did you dream about Tina doing something mean to you yesterday? I'm going to look at you and go, wow, how did you figure that one out? And that's, King Nebuchadnezzar he's going, okay, I'm listening now. You've got my attention because you just described my dream. Now I'm going to ask you some questions